We're here with actor and political activist George Takei, and I am really honored to be able to speak to you today. We've done so many stories about you on The Young Turks, especially about your political activism and your acting career. And I just really want the audience to get to know you on a very personal level, so thank you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to join you.
It's my pleasure. So why don't we start off with your background? I mean, you actually, of course, you have this incredible acting career. You know, you were known for your role in Star Trek, but you also got involved in politics at a very early age. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, actually, what shaped my life is what happened to all Japanese Americans during the Second World War. Pearl Harbor was bombed. And overnight, American citizens of Japanese ancestry were looked at with suspicion and fear and outright hatred simply because we happened to look like the people that bombed Pearl Harbor. And we were put in barbed wire American prison camps. They called them internment camps, but you know, they were really, for all rights and purposes, concentration camps. There were sentry towers with the machine guns pointed at us. And when I made the night runs from the barracks to the latrine, searchlights followed us. But for me, as a 5-year-old at that time, I thought it was kind of nice that the searchlights lit the way for me to pee. You know, I was too young to really understand what was happening to us. So I adjusted. Children are amazingly adaptable, you know, and that became the normality in my life. Lining up 3 times a day to eat in a noisy mess hall, complain about the lousy food, became routine. And when the war ended, we came back to Los Angeles. Many people did not because they were so embittered by the experience on the West Coast. And as I grew up, as a teenager, I started reading civics books and history books, and I saw nothing in that about my childhood experience. But I read the glorious chapters about our democracy. And so I engaged my father in long discussions after dinner, trying to reconcile, you know, our imprisonment during the war and all the ideals that I've been reading about. And my father said to me, our democracy is a people's democracy. It can be as great as a people can be, but it's also as fallible as people are. And our democracy is vitally dependent on good people being actively engaged in the process. And shortly after that, he took me to the Adlai Stevenson for President headquarters, and he volunteered me. Mm-hmm. And that's how I got introduced to political activism. It was a lot of fun, but by that time I was starting to understand something about our democracy.
Do you see parallels with how Japanese Americans were treated during that time and how Muslim Americans are being treated today?
You know, we Japanese Americans immediately recognized after 9/11 what might be happening to the Arab American community. At that time, I was the chairman of the board of the Japanese American National Museum, a museum we founded here in Los Angeles, but we're affiliated with the Smithsonian. And we immediately organized a candlelight ceremony in our plaza. We invited leaders from the Arab American community and older Japanese Americans who remember the internment, and they spoke. And because our museum's 3 blocks away from City Hall, that candlelight ceremony turned into a candlelight march to City Hall and back. And then we organized a symposium about a month later with Kitty Feldy of NPR as our moderator. And we invited a representative from the County Sheriff's Department, a representative from the County Human Relations Commission, a representative from the Arab American community, and a representative from the older Japanese American community. And we also extended an invitation to the FBI. The FBI was the only agency to demur. And we had it was not totally a surprise.
Right.
It was a lively discussion, and it was broadcast on NPR. So we do recognize what happens when a calamitous event happens in this country, and that the perpetrators are a recognizable ethnic, racial, or whatever group that they might be.
What is the one political issue that you feel most passionately about? And I know about your work with Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I know about your work within the gay community, but I know that you actually focus on many political issues. And what is the one issue that's like constantly on your mind that you would want to tackle?
Well, the issue is the struggle for social justice. I was involved in the civil rights movement. I marched with Dr. King, Dr. Martin Luther King, and I raised my voice in song with Dr. King. I was involved in the anti-Vietnam War movement. I was a delegate, McGovern delegate to the Democratic National Convention in 1972. And when the movement began for redress for the unconstitutional incarceration of Japanese Americans, I testified at the Congressional Commission, and I was active in that movement. But through all that, I was silent about another issue that was an immutable part of me, because I was pursuing a career as an actor. And if that was known, it would have been very damaging. In fact, I wouldn't have had an acting career. So I pretended, I lived a double life. And the thing about that is you're constantly living with fear, that ever-present fear of exposure. And the irony of that was I was pursuing an acting career in a business that is the most publicly exposed business that I could go into. So, you know, that tension and that fear was always there.
You were an actor in your own life. You were playing a role.
That's right.
That was, you know, completely counter to who you really were. What was it that finally convinced you that it was time to, you know, reveal who you really are?
Laws that were, I saw the various anti or homophobic laws as barbed wire fences, you know, laws with barbs in them of hate and ignorance. But those laws started falling by the wayside, and I was still silent. But in California, something extraordinary happened, unprecedented. Both houses of our legislature, the Senate and the Assembly, passed the marriage equality bill. And all that was needed for that to become the law of the state was the signature of our governor, who was a Hollywood movie star, Arnold Schwarzenegger. And when he campaigned, he said, I'm from Hollywood, I've worked with gays and lesbians, some of my best friends are. So I thought, surely he's going to sign that marriage equality bill. When he played to his arch-conservative, reactionary Republican base and vetoed it, I was raging with anger. And that's when I decided I have to speak out on that, and my voice had to be authentic. I came out as gay.
Yeah, and that's a really courageous thing to do, especially when you have a Hollywood background. Do you feel that the climate has changed at all for people who are currently actors and actresses in Hollywood?
It has changed dramatically. There are people we know that are still closeted, but there are many public figures that are now not only out, but actively engaged in the process. And I think that's what's contributing to the change. But we still have a long ways to go because, you know, this summer the Supreme Court ruled that marriage equality is the law in states where it is the law. 13 states plus our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. That's 1/3 of the nation. But when I pledge allegiance to the flag, I pledge allegiance to one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have a divided nation, 1/3 with equality, 2/3 have people that want that equality, but they are deprived of it.
So what is it going to take for, our federal government to understand that gay rights is a civil rights issue, not necessarily a states' rights issue? Because, I mean, if you really think about it, if some states said, we're going to pass laws that actively discriminate against black people. I mean, you're born with that skin color, you can't change it. And it's the same thing with gay people. They're born with that sexual orientation. But what is it going to take for the federal government to see the issue in that similar way, where gay people are born this way, and this isn't a states' rights thing. This is a civil rights issue.
The campaign has to continue, but it is inevitable because recently there was a field poll taken in California, and it found that 78% of the young people under 39, and from my vantage point, 39 is young, young people under 39 are strong supporters of equality for the LGBT people. 78% are for equality. So it's eventually going to happen. I love young straight couples because they're the ones that are going to be producing the gay babies of the future. And so the more that people get enlightened, informed, in the same way that race, the African Americans, we have an African American president. But you have to see this in the larger picture. When this nation was founded, people like you, women, did not have any rights. You couldn't vote, you couldn't own land, you didn't have rights over your own children. But because determined women and fair-minded men challenged and debated and marched, that today we have you here, women astronauts that go soaring into space. We have
don't
equality.
You miss the good old days when women were just in the kitchen? And I'm just kidding.
No, look at what's happening in Washington now. Women's legislators, senators, are taking the lead now in this chaos that's happening in Congress.
Yeah. Definitely. I mean, I see people like Elizabeth Warren, and I think about how, if it wasn't for certain people who fought for women's rights, warriors like Elizabeth Warren wouldn't have the ability to do what she's doing right now. And she's one of the few progressives right now in our government that are fighting for the right purposes.
Exactly.
So did you experience any negative reaction to coming out? I mean, I'm sure you were afraid of getting some sort of criticism or facing consequences for it. Did you get even a little bit of that after you came out?
Well, certainly there were the hate mails, but it was overwhelmingly positive. And particularly in the Japanese American community, people aren't venturesome. And I've been with Brad for many decades by that time.
Which is admirable. It takes a lot to be with one person for that long. So.
Oh, well, we had a struggle, and we were determined to be a positive example for that. And some of these older Japanese Americans who always had little difficulty in introducing Brad and me when we were together started saying, "Oh yes, this is George's husband." Nice. Because it gave legitimacy to them to come out as people who recognized who we were. But until we did, it was always a little awkward.
Yeah,
so it's changing, the silent majority as well. And that's where the real power is. I maintain that the majority of the people in this country are decent, hardworking people. But because they're hardworking, they don't have the time to think about other people's issue. And when they become aware of it, then they become positive forces in our society.
Unfortunately, we have to wrap up the interview, but I do have one final question for you. I mean, right now, there's this huge battle in Congress about the debt ceiling and how are we going to fund our government and this government shutdown. I just wanted to get your quick thoughts on that before we, unfortunately have to end.
Well, it's a nut house there, that Congress. And, I don't know how it's going to end, but, we do have a deadline. I think what happened in California, we had an initiative that resulted in a proposition to stop the legislature just could not come up with a budget on time. Every year it was always delayed. So we got a proposition that said if the legislature can't produce its budget on time, then their pay will stop.
Yeah,
for the past couple of years, we've had the budget on time. Our senators, our congressmen are still being paid. When they are throwing all these other people out of their jobs, we've got to get them where it hurts them directly, their salary.
Definitely. I mean, it's kind of incredible that the fate of our country lies in their hands, and yet they face no consequences for their actions.
Right.
We're the ones who have to suffer the consequences.
Exactly.
George Takei, thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Well, I enjoyed chatting with you.